Jeremy, great to see you. I'm glad we were able to connect. We're connecting on a little more regular basis now. I'm Nick
Right.
Douglas. For the folks that don't know me, I'm the author of Finding Octave. It's a story about two Creole families in Louisiana and slavery in Louisiana. And I'm a regular writer for Afropunk and now most recently Face to Face Africa. So
Okay. Well, my name is Jeremy Simien. I'm a Louisiana historian. I'm a collector, and I'm actively finding, collecting, and interpreting pieces of material culture that tell the story of so-called Louisiana Creoles and really tell the story of a broader African diaspora in the United States.
yeah, so Jeremy, I know there are a couple of topics that you wanted to talk to today, and so let's just jump right into it. So
Well, sure. So here we are. We find ourselves in an interesting spot, I think, because we've been at this for a little while. You probably longer than me, of course, as far as researching your history and finding out about these micro histories and these hidden stories about so-called Black excellence. Or Creoles of color, and some, especially the free people of color, and some of those stories that have been suppressed and overlooked for so long. And I think we find ourselves in the season where these things are very much in tune. I think people are hungry for this. It's not just people of color, but especially people of African descent. And I think we're facing some interesting challenges. This isn't all negative. A lot of this is exciting
mhm.
because people are connecting and we're finding out new things. And most importantly, we have a bit of attention. So people are interested in sharing this, which is in effect bringing attention, which is bringing interaction. And so I wanted to kind of discuss some of what I feel are the obstacles that we're facing with this, because a lot of times we talk about the history and we talk about what our people faced in the past. And we see some parallels, what they faced in the past that's going on today. And of course, any student of history is always going to be able to find something from the past that kind of seems to rhyme with the present and potentially give some insight into the future. So I wanted to just kind of touch on some of the subjects again, bad narratives that are still being propagated by supposed scholars. I wanted to kind of talk about the agency of white supremacy and how it's changed. It's not as overt as it was in the past, but it very much still exists. It's very much still at play, and we're very much still subjected to operating within the confines of it. I wanted to talk about some of the sensationalism that has gotten a lot of attention recently, which again, people love sensationalism. This again will continue to breed negative narratives and will continue to bring fictitious narratives and exploitive narratives that we've seen. There was an age of exploit. There was an exploit era, is what I call it, and we're
Mhm.
still fighting that. And it seems like they're coming back with this renewed interest. We have a lot of positive things happening, but we also are fighting a lot of that old things, the quadroon balls, what a Creole is, et cetera, et cetera. And I just wanted to touch on also, a lot of people reach out to me on Instagram and even here and say, how can I collect this stuff? Can I look for this stuff? Yes, everybody can play a part in this. Everybody can be a cultural ambassador. It's your culture, and if it's not your culture, we've always had allies, and we
Mhm.
appreciate the allies no matter what they look like. There's a difference between an ally and an interloper. Okay,
Yeah, we'll talk
we
about that
have
too.
those two. I've been thinking. I've been thinking. I said, how do you open this box and start spilling it out and looking at the pieces? So I just want to kind of talk about that, talk about some of the games that we've seen run and played by these interlopers, and I want to talk about systematic oppression that's still at play within our institutions. This includes museums, universities, and even other aspects of control and institutions that wish to control that.
Well, Jeremy,
So,
that you have picked off a big list here.
yeah,
Where do we
it's a little
start?
ambitious.
Let's start with the bad narratives. I mean, I think that's something that we talk about a lot, and we're trying to fight those. And it seems as though we're at a serious disadvantage at times, because we've had these bad narratives built up over hundreds of years, really. I mean,
Yeah.
and we're now in a position where, like you say, we're getting some attention, and we're able to sort of counter some of these narratives. But some of them have been crystallized in the minds of people, right? So
Right.
they have to basically, like you say, unlearn the history that they've learned. So, what are your thoughts about this? I mean,
Well, I think the one we have to bring up, and we have to maybe bring it up in a broader form, is we constantly hear in the story of Louisiana, and we are New Orleans centric. We are Louisiana centric. We're going to talk about that. That's what we know. That's our family history. But as we said before, the history of New Orleans with the migration, the Great Migration of people of African descent, touches so many people in this country. So don't tune out just because you hear New Orleans. Oh, my people aren't from New Orleans. You don't know that. So just check and see.
mhm,
But we constantly hear about quadrant balls and constantly hear about free women of color being the consort or the side chicks of European men. And we haven't scratched away at this yet, but I think we're ready to listen now and recognize why this story is repeated and repeated. Some keeps following around, okay, keeps popping up on my Facebook, and it says if you make a people ashamed of their history, they will not talk about it or they will not share it. I'm paraphrasing. I think that one of the biggest embarrassments and disappointments, or not even disappointments, but one of the way of shaming people of color, especially Louisiana people of color, was to talk negatively about women of African descent and to continue to spread this narrative that any women of color, any free people of color descendants were simply the illegitimate children of a white man who went to a ball or a party and picked out which one he wanted and paid her mom or paid her, and there you go. He popped up, had kids with her, and set her up, in a house in the Treme or Marigny, and that's how that happened. That's why y'all are all here. Be embarrassed, be ashamed, you
mhm,
know.
mhm,
And what we've found is the more and more we look, we see that these women of color were actually marrying men of color. And, that's something that we never hear free men of color. We never hear about free men of color until very recently.
yeah,
And the omission of that, I think, is very telling. It's because those people were omitted, and this exploitive narrative of quadrant balls and women of color and a white man being able to have his choice at anyone and set them up took flight. And we could never shake that. And some people were ashamed of who they were because they believed that was their origins.
mhm,
And that was even spread by black people because it was printed. And it was printed during a dark age when we were all recovering from the
mhm.
effects of the Civil War, Reconstruction.
Construction, yeah, and Jim Crow has taken hold. Jeremy, my whole, I mean, the whole point of my book, really, Finding Octave, is talking about these free men of color and all the things that they did. Um, and I can't stress enough the fact that not only do I think that they are responsible for the civil rights movement and responsible for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, but they are responsible for moving the civil rights movement forward over the years. And they were of, you know, it's you talk about omission, but it's more this. If the story of free men of color and the things that they did came out, well, that totally destroys the whole myth of white supremacy. If you have
Yes.
free men of color who are operating and acting on behalf of a nation and a community, and they're doing the righteous thing as far as talking about equality, voting, all the sort of tenets that we hold so dear in the Constitution, and then you have white men that are doing the opposite, trying to stop the vote, suppress and suppress the deeds of these people, right? So
Right.
we often talk about that Creoles of color owned a third of the French Quarter. You know,
Right.
that's not something that we just made up. It's something that is a factual, historical fact. And so, how did they do that? Well, they were entrepreneurs. They you know they were movers and shakers. They used
Educated.
they
They
were
were educated.
educated. That's exactly right. And so and you know the other thing is that they formed this a sort of community that they realized that they needed to depend on each other because they were really being set upon by at all from all sides, right?
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
and so I, I have a sort of a passage in one of my books where a New York Daily News reporter talks about free people of color, free men of color, and he describes them by saying that they're the equals of any um, white men that you might find in the boardroom, that they are worldly, they are educated, and but for the fact that they have African blood running through their veins, they would be considered the leaders of the country. They would be considered among the leaders of the country. So you know when you
Right.
and now imagine that. Now this is 1864 when this guy is saying this. So imagine
Okay.
if that narrative had gotten out there. What would that have done to the South? Right?
Right.
So you see it's sort of the suppression, right?
Right, absolutely. And we see what happens for just a brief kind of, if you're just hearing about free people of color, there was a large population of these free people of color in Louisiana. They existed in other parts of the country as well, but Louisiana was unique because it was under French and under Spanish control and later acquired by the
In
United
the States.
States.
Yeah.
So
And
different
you know something,
than
Jeremy? I think it is important to say some of these other places. So we know Charleston, South Carolina, had a huge
right.
free population of color. Baltimore, Maryland,
Baltimore,
Yeah,
Maryland.
Baltimore, Maryland. Maryland was a slave state, I think. I think it was a slave state, or Delaware was a slave state. These, you know, you have these populations of free people of color that are doing tremendous things within the boundaries of slave states. So, you know, when you're, you know, here's my sort of take on it, and this gets right to your point of bad narratives, right? We talk about Frederick Douglass, and Frederick Douglass is a fantastic person. I have nothing against Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass did some amazing things. Escaped from slavery. He used seaman's papers to disguise himself as a seaman and get on a train and go to leave a slave state and go to his freedom. And he started the North Star and was fought basically his whole life against slavery and inequality. Okay, so Frederick Douglass is this guy, but he was doing this in the North, right? Now we have the same type of people in the South who are doing the same kind of thing. We have the Rudinays, the Burtonos, you know these kind of I will say social warriors, Day Dunes, the Trevines of the world.
Social activists.
Yeah, social activists,
Yeah.
and they're doing this. They're doing this in the deepest of the deep South. Now,
Right.
why don't we hear those names? Why do we always go to Frederick Douglass?
Well, you know why? I think
Yeah.
that's something to talk about right then and there. The reason why I think is because Frederick Douglass was known up north. The acts of suppression by institutions and by citizens was not as severe up north as it was here. They literally rewrote our history
Mm-hmm.
here. They erased, they did everything to crush it after the folding of Reconstruction, which we've done videos on Reconstruction. We can't get into all this
Mm-hmm.
tonight, but look up Reconstruction Look up the 1868. Was it the Constitution? The Louisiana
Yeah,
Constitution was
black and
1868.
tan Constitution, right?
Black and tan Constitution. You had men of color in the government participating and doing a good job,
Hmm.
which scared the hell out of
Right. And so,
everybody who was against that.
so what happens is the same thing, the same situation that we have today, where we get into this name calling and characterizing people as a menagerie of monkeys and all this kind of crazy stuff.
Right.
And so we get into this, we have the same, I mean, the exact same thing happening today. I mean, we had our first black president characterized as a monkey. I mean, that's, you know,
Right.
that's, so, you know, the playbook hasn't changed, right?
Yeah.
But what has changed now is that we're able to talk about this in a rational way. We're able to bring those names out: the Rudenays, the Burtonos, the Trevines, the Dedunes, you know, all these people that the Plices of the world. I mean, we're able to bring these people out, and so, you know, I firmly will argue with anybody that the free men of color in New Orleans were
Whereas
at the
mighty
forefront.
skinny.
Yeah, they risked everything, and they were at the forefront of everything that all the gains that we made through all of history. And you know, when we talk about them, you know, I was saying the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Okay, I mean, these guys went and petitioned Lincoln. They went and petitioned the Senate. Went and petitioned Congress. You know, when we're talking about the Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. Well, it was Creoles of color in 1877 who did the original case about segregation in schools, right?
Right.
And so Paul Trevine actually had a case go to the Supreme Court of Louisiana fighting segregation in schools because during that time during Reconstruction, children were allowed to attend the same school. Black and white children were allowed to attend the
And in
same school.
fact, next time y'all are in town in New Orleans and y'all want to pass by the haunted house on Royal Street, the Lalaurie Mansion, know that that was a desegregated girls' school. And you need to look this up. Actually, it was stormed by white citizens, but they were so confused they couldn't quite tell who was white and who was colored. So they left it alone. Just to give you an idea how crazy things were in Louisiana. But anyway, that's so next time y'all in New Orleans, pass by it. But yes, we had all this progress, and it was erased. But not only was it erased by setbacks, by the change of laws, the change and the sliding back, it was erased in the textbooks. It never made it to the textbooks. The ink wasn't even dry yet.
Mm-hmm.
It was just at the printing press. And we had our own printing presses. We had newspapers. We had people actively trying to spread this word and share this word. And we know some of their words remain. And they still, you know, they're still able to be found. I mean, and we're just recently we've had interest in La Union and the Tribune, that is these newspapers by people of African descent in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
But why in the hell haven't you heard of these people? And this is the miseducation. I grew up in Louisiana. I went to school. There's two things, a lot of things I remember about Catholic school. But I'm going to bring up one, and this isn't about Catholic school, but my point I'm making is this is a private school that I went to. One, I remember asking the teacher, is Egypt in Africa? The teacher's response, kind of. okay, but this is the mentality. This is the mentality.
Mm-hmm.
High school. I remember this older teacher. I know her name. I'm not going to say it. Don't worry. I'm not like that. And she says, "Does anybody know what the Civil War was about?" Everybody said, "No." Yeah, people said it was about slavery. She says, "You're wrong, wrong, wrong. Y'all don't know what the hell y'all are talking about. Civil War wasn't about slavery." So all of these narratives and these false narratives and this bad education from good schools,
Mm-hmm.
from private, from private schools and all of these supposed institutions that were supposed to be giving us the proper narratives and they were hopeless. Even when I'm born in 1985. I can't imagine what they were telling kids in 1965 or
Mm-hmm.
1945.
Yeah.
I know, I can't imagine. I know in 1938 we have a state museum who puts out a book rewarding the efforts of restoring white supremacy. Literally, the whole book talks about how the Ku Klux Klan were the saviors, and though they had questionable methods, they did a great job for the people. What does that mean? What does that do to people who were growing up in the 1920s? My grandparents were 10 years old in 1938.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm talking about. This is why people are ashamed of their history, afraid to not even, they were afraid to ask about their history. And the older people were afraid to tell them about their history because they were afraid they would be laughed at and it would be just seen as stories.
Well, and you know something? That's the other thing. That's the other, and when you say stories, that brings something to mind to me. That it's almost like a what these guys did was not real. Like it never
This,
happened, right? It never, and I mean, in the history books, it never happened, right? Now we're
it never
talking
happened.
about it, and I can show you the documents. I can show you the writings about this, and it's still not out there, right? It's
Right.
still not out there, right?
And
Um,
that's a recent thing and this is important to know too. I have cousins who've been doing research since the 1970s and even 80s. And you go to these little places in Natchitoches or Opelousas, you say, "Hey, I'm looking for this." What you looking for that for? They didn't have to show you these things. They
mhm.
didn't have to let you find out about these things. So when we talk about what happened, how the hell have you never heard of this? There's efforts. And it wasn't all sinister. They weren't all uniformed efforts. It was simply your agenda did not align with their agenda, and that way you were pushed out. It
Mhm.
wasn't like there was a this isn't a conspiracy. It was more of a a fragmented effort by a bunch of people who were interested in their agenda and not in giving you any tools to learn about what could bring you to that next level, which is learning the history.
Right. And you know something, Jeremy? I mean, I look at it as a I mean, sort of a psychological battle, right? So sort of psychological warfare because what happened with all these um, situations in the South, like for example, them stopping people from forming schools, like Marie Couvin. She had proposed and given the land for a school, given the money to have it open up to orphans and children who had not were not able to afford an education, and they fought it for 11 or 12 years to stop it from being built. The idea that in the state of New Orleans, black people or black businessmen could not incorporate because they could not sit on the board of a company. And so, what does that do to black entrepreneurs? Well, you're denied all the benefits that you get from forming a corporation, right?
Right. And it
Tax
makes
benefit.
you reliant upon white patronage. And
Exactly.
it limits you. And the same thing with the school system. You were reliant upon their school books.
Hmm.
You were reliant upon their narrative. And that this is still going on today. We have the information, but we have so much static in the line.
Hmm. And
It's
you know
hard
something.
to find what's real and what's faux.
And you know when you talk about this agency of white supremacy, I mean, and now we're getting into critical race theory and all. That's just some crap that's made up. I mean, that's just a name that they put on this. But
Right.
my thing
Man,
is
I'm gonna take a sip.
not to. I'm not trying to rewrite history. You know, when I'm telling a narrative and I'm weaving in my narrative. I'm weaving in people of color into the narrative of what was going on in the United States and showing action and reaction. Um,
Right.
and so that's important to do to put things in the context of what was going on. We talked about this with the Reconstruction and why Reconstruction was ended so quickly. And it was other factors that are rarely ever get discussed, and um, I don't want to retread that, but just let let
Right.
let's just let me say just one thing about that. and we talked about this in the video that we did, but it was Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull who were fighting against the Northeastern Railroad that caused a panic in the economic system that that started a 6-year depression that led to that was sort of this snowball effect of that pressure that they were putting on, forcing railroads to close, turning the economy into starting the scare, this 6-year scare, and then having a disputed election, snowballed into the end of Reconstruction, right?
Right.
So if you don't put that, that's not critical race theory to bring that idea into the mix of why Reconstruction ended so quickly. We know that Southerners were fighting against Reconstruction as well. It wasn't. I'm not saying that Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull did it, but what I'm saying is, hey, what they did. This is what they did had an effect on what happened to Americans of African descent in the South. And so,
Yes.
if we don't put everything together like that, we don't put everything in context, then we're dealing with silos, and we get into a situation where the narrative is only that people of Creoles of color only come from these quadrant balls, right,
Right.
or whatever, right, and so
Illicit relationships,
right,
and they're
right,
the
right.
bastard children of all of that. They're not men who purchase their own freedom. They're not women who purchase their own freedom. And we know that that's a fact. I have a document from my ancestor purchasing his own freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but to touch on what you're saying, I have on there on this list critical race theory, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of that because honestly, I think there's very few people who fully understand what that curriculum actually, what the actual outline of that is fully.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is this: when people say, "How dare you teach my children that people of color, black people of African descent, grew up in a system that was against them?" All I have to do is pull out a couple of documents that have a state seal on them and let you read the first 5 pages where it talks about the inferior Negro.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on to talk about how, thank God, we were able to wrestle away power from the inferior Negro and the Northerners and get it back. That inferior Negro, okay, that inferior Negro, that mindset, that thought, that's something that people heard for generations.
Mm-hmm.
The feelings of that and the repercussions of that, that's a permanent scar. That's a generational scar. So to fast forward and not get too deep on that, but I do want to put some excerpts from that book, that was written by a prominent historian,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the official narrative of the Museum of Louisiana. That's the official narrative. It's printed in the book.
Mm-hmm.
It has the governor's seal on the back. Now, this is 1938. And that sounds like a long time ago.
No, it isn't.
It's not a long
It's
time
not a
ago.
long time ago.
Because guess what? Things didn't get better in 1939.
That's right.
They started to kind of get better in 1959. And in 1969, things were getting better. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You had the Vietnam War. You have some people finally able, okay. 1979, okay. So we're still wrestling with that.
Mm-hmm.
You're still dealing with generational scars from that. And either way, we can't get into everything. But what I will say is this: people constantly ask me, okay, you're somebody who goes out and collects things and finds these interesting pieces. I have in my collection, I have images of free men of color, identified, free women of color. I have pictures. I have documents. Why is this not in a museum? Now, you will see some pieces in museums that pertain to people of African descent. But why is it that we keep seeing the same kind of pieces that tell the same story, and we don't see the pieces that I have?
Well, Jeremy, here's the thing. What pieces do you see in a museum? You see slave pieces. You see the handcuffs and the neck
Right.
chains and
people in a perpetual state of enslavement.
yeah. You
See the big
you see that
plantations.
picture of the guy with his back with all the welts on it. Those are the images that we see. We never see a well-dressed
Black man
black man
looking right at the camera,
looking at the
looking right
camera.
at the artist
Hmm.
with confidence.
Right, exactly. And
Why?
and so yeah,
We
go,
never we never hear about his real estate holdings totaling $150,000 in the year 1850.
mm-hmm,
Why? So
mm-hmm,
here I am. I'm 36 years old. I'm not a museum professional. I did not go to school for museum management. So why is it, and how is it I'm able to find these things? You know, somebody, a museum official asked a friend of mine who's a historian in a snarky manner one time, and how is he able to find these things? Well, I'm going to tell you how I'm able to find these things. I put an honest effort looking,
mm-hmm,
period. I put forth an honest effort looking. You
mm-hmm,
haven't, you didn't find.
mm-hmm.
So one of my pet peeves, and I hate to get on this, but it's just true, and we
Go for
got
your
to be
pet peeves.
transparent. We're already here. We're already here. Uh, you know, so a lot of people, because people constantly ask me, well, why are your pieces on display? Why aren't your pieces on display? There's still an institution of white supremacy that controls these museums. If you told me this 5 years ago, I'd laugh at you and say, come on. It's 20, whatever,
It's 20,
15,
yeah.
16.
Mm-hmm.
You're out of your mind. No, I'm not out of my mind. It's different now. They're not after you or people of color as a whole. It's just your agenda doesn't align with theirs. And thus, you will not get the benefits and the resources because it is contrary to what they want. And what they want is not the same as what they wanted 100 years ago. It's different, but it's still the same in many ways.
Y- y-
So go no go
No,
ahead.
no, no. Go ahead, Jared. Go ahead. I don't want to break
Oh no,
your
there's
thoughts
not.
there.
What I was going to say is this: I've been in the boardrooms. I've been invited on the boards. Okay, and I've heard the good talk about how we're diverse and how we're going to continue to be diverse. I've felt this before at an event. It's a
Mm-hmm,
little woman pulling me and making sure that I'm in the photograph. That photograph is for y'all,
mm-hmm,
so y'all can see how diverse they are.
mm-hmm.
It's not because they're diverse. It's not because they're interested, okay, in showing diversity, other than to give just enough to make people quiet. It's the same thing with the Mardi Gras exhibitions, the jazz exhibitions. It's the same thing with the culinary exhibitions. I mean, how many smiling people can we show in front of fried chicken,
Mm-hmm.
in front of soul food restaurants, and praise these people? Where is the intellect? And I'm not saying that these people who do this, who are in the culinary arts, or who are jazz musicians, do not have an intellectual component. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that is not what is highlighted.
Mm-hmm.
Entertainment value, the astronomical value.
You know something, Jeremy? Here's my take on this.
Okay.
America's not ready for the story yet. They're not ready for our story, and here's why I say that. When you turn on that TV or you look at that movie, what do you see? You're seeing slave narratives. You're seeing slaves run away from somebody, hiding under a house, scared, or more recently now you're seeing the civil rights movement from the '60s, right? So you get the idea that there was slavery, and then everything was fine until the '60s, and then black people started acting up, right? And so, what do we lose? We lose 150 years of history because the narrative that we have, like I, I never want to see another slave narrative. And you know something? We're doing a disservice by going and promoting those. I mean, as people of color, we are doing a disservice by going and promoting those. And simply because of this, that slave narrative that we have is everybody knows it already. We
Well,
know,
relate
yeah,
to
yeah.
relate to the history game. too, you have to realize something too, and this is true. This is true. Um, White people had a head start. I always make the equation of the Acadians,
Mm-hmm.
the so-called Cajuns, who were people with Acadian ancestry. Many of them were actually white Creoles, but we'll get into that
Mm-hmm.
another day.
Mm-hmm.
But these people largely were non-educated um, and not wealthy, not well off, poor. But something happened to them. Out of tragedy, something happened. World War. They got exposed to all these places they'd never been to before. They got advantages when they came back. Their children got better advantages. They went to college
They got the
before
GI Bill,
us.
right? They yeah. Mm-hmm.
Before us.
Mm-hmm.
They got to write the books before us. They got to read the old books and reincorporate them into the new narrative. So I think still we have a lot of these stories that are going around that we're holding on to as our own.
Mm-hmm.
And while they may represent a fraction or a part of the story, it's a part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
not the whole story. The whole story is so mighty, and it is so overwhelmingly extraordinary. And for us, we read about it every day, and so we don't get to take it in the totality of it, and we don't get to have that kind of virgin mindset of listening to some of these things. Can't see the forest for the trees sometimes because we're so submerged in it. But some of the littlest things that I repeat all the time that I know, and people are like, "What?" They're amazed by this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. If we got these narratives out there, it could really it could change so much.
Yeah, and I try to write about this as much as I can. And for Afropunk, I did a number of different articles, like talking about Maroons. People of African descent who lived outside of white control. You think of you'll never hear that. You'll never hear that story. You'll never
You
hear
never
that
know
story.
how they were
Right?
afraid to go out there to go
They
get
were
it.
afraid to go out there, right? In the
Oh,
Rigolettes, they
yeah.
were afraid to go out to the Rigolettes because Juan St. Malo controlled the thing. Or the idea that slaves got up and walked away. I mean, this
It
is
disappeared to Mexico.
right. Disappeared to Mexico. Thousands of people disappeared to Mexico. Thousands of people disappeared into Florida,
And the and
into
the
Spanish Florida,
Mexicans
right?
and the Mexicans told y'all, get out, get out.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a true story.
And so instead of seeing how the building blocks of how slavery fell apart, like all the action and work that was being done by free people of color, white people of goodwill. I mean,
Right,
there's
of course.
there's pitched battles. There's pitched battles in between on the borders of the slave states and free states, helping slaves escape across
But
the
I have to
Ohio
say
River.
this
Right?
real quick. I said Mexico said get out. I was talking about the bounty hunters, the
Yes.
slave trackers. They did not say that to the slaves. They enslaved people. They let them right in.
Let them come in.
Okay,
Exactly.
they
Exactly.
did not turn away these political refugees.
Yes.
They let them right in.
And we know about
Okay.
that because I have relatives who are in Mexico who settled in Mexico,
I
and they
keep
didn't
getting
they weren't
names
runaway
from
slaves either.
Mexico
They weren't
as well.
runaway slaves, and so think about that. Think about the idea that African Americans who were born here in the United States, left of their own free will, and went to Mexico. Right. So these stories never get told, but instead we see the slave narrative. Now I don't blame these actors for doing these slave narratives. That's maybe the only script that they get, right?
Right.
But
And they don't realize how pale those stories are because it's the truest story they've been told, but it's still pale
yes,
comparison. So we got to know that it's not like they're not trying to continue to just show this to people. It's the truest story they know.
and to me, it's cheap entertainment and it sells the viewer short
Oh yeah, for
because
sure.
the viewing public wants to know a more complicated history than just people being subjugated and always being under foot of somebody. And I think
Right.
that idea we need to. I mean, of course, we're fighting that idea, right? And by just putting out there like your collection is fighting that idea. When you show up a piece of a free man of color, you're saying, well, to have this painted, he had to be of pretty substantial wealth. Look at how well he's dressed. Look at, I mean, you're telling a whole story, and America's not ready for that. I mean, I hate to say that.
There's cognitive dissonance on it, and you know what's crazy too. So to get back on what I was saying, because I kind of blundered on it.
Mhm.
These museums want to tell us all about jazz. Okay, they want to tell us all about Black Mardi Gras traditions. They want to tell us all about famous so and so's fried chicken, so and so's this and that and this. So they want to pick and choose which aspects of Black culture they want to show, and they stick in the ways that are entertaining, that smell good, taste good, and make them laugh and dance good. But they don't want to tell you the truth. And when we talk about systematic oppression, we talk about institutionalized racism and white supremacy. I'm going to tell you this, it absolutely exists. It exists on boards of museums. It exists in private sectors that are supposedly, I don't know, nonprofits trying to help. And you say, well, okay, what do you mean, though? What are you actually saying? What I'm actually saying is the same people's families who participated in the overthrowing of the mixed race government, the same people who were invited to very private, and this sounds conspiracy theories, but it's not, exclusive Mardi Gras for white people only, who formed these alliances with other families through their cloak and dagger style of operating in New Orleans. Their children are still controlling shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't curse, but they're still controlling things.
Yeah,
And they will try to silence you, and they will try to gaslight you. And if you told me this 5 years ago, I would laugh in your face. I'd say, come on, really? Really? But as somebody who began to collect, to find things, and wanted to share these things, I had to begin to do things in the sense of, okay, well, I've got to get involved in these things. I have to try to play at this game.
Yeah, you got to get in the game, dude. Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you what happens when you play their game. There's more game to play every day. There's new rules.
They changed the goalposts.
Change the rules. You missed that memo? And I hate that. I'm not a defeatist person. I'm not defeated here. I'm just telling you, the only way we're going to change things is really to say, listen, we know what's going on. Knock it off. This is what we need. Mm-hmm. We're tired of the Mardi Gras exhibits. We know about that. We're tired of the jazz exhibits. We're tired about you. We're tired of you talking about the same four cooks in the city.
Mm-hmm. And you know something, Jeremy. That's the point. The point you're making is this: they're talking about the same four people every time. Right? Every time. We're talking about, okay, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass.
And even if it's a New Orleans local, they want to honorary, put some. But and I'm not trying to get in the way of anybody's notoriety. I think everybody deserves their flowers or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they want to feed you what is safe, that's not spicy, and they want to tell you it's the truest flavor. That's what I'm talking about. What these narratives, these they're telling you that's the truest version of the story, but that's not the truth.
You know something, Jeremy? So let's talk about the sensationalism.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, this particularly rubs me the wrong way, and the reason that I say that is that we're when we talk about Louisiana, we talk about passing a lot.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
And that's the worst kind of sensationalism that you can have. It's tintillating, and the reasoning behind it is always the idea that black is somehow tainted. Mm-hmm. Right?
It's sensationalism of tragic mulatto stories.
The tragic mulattoes, yeah, and the tragic mulattoes. Then
imitation of life.
Yeah, and even saying it makes me feel uncomfortable. You know what I'm saying? And
it's comforting. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah. And so the idea and people are fascinated by this. Books about passing, how people pass into whiteness is. This is fodder that people. They just can't get enough of this. They're eating it up with a spoon. But when you talk about really the numbers of this, Well, there are 15,000 people of African descent a year that move into whiteness, just statistically, right? We have 75 million people in the United States who have African DNA.
I'm not surprised. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't verify these numbers, but I'm not
No, I know,
questioning
and no,
because it's like
they're verified. They're verified.
it makes sense.
I have a book, the legal history of the color line, which highlights the statistical analysis that's done. Look it up. I mean, I'm not, and
Well, without outing anybody, I have a close friend who's a white person, and they were shocked when their dad had 3 or 4% African ancestry because they're like, "How in the hell is this possible?" He's
right,
like,
right.
"It's called slavery. It's called y'all lived in the South for the last 300 years.
And that's what
That's how
happens.
it's possible.
That's what
That's how
happens.
it's possible."
Yeah, and that's what happens. And of course, Louisiana is the state with the most white people who have African DNA.
The highest percentage,
Yeah.
10% odd. Some of these people walk around 10, 12%,
Yeah.
saying all kinds of crazy things under their breath. They're
Exactly.
all along, they're our cousin.
Yeah, and so like I say, this sensationalism. Well, it happens, and how do people of mixed ancestry happen? Well, they happen because people live next to each other. They have relationships with each other. They fall in love. Sometimes, of course, in slavery times, it was not a equal relationship.
Right.
And maybe even after that, it was not an equal relationship.
Right,
There
there
were
was
rapes and all that kind of things.
especially of women of color, no doubt.
Essentially, because in Louisiana we had blacks and whites living in such close proximity to each other, that people just got together, and so
Life happened.
yeah,
Life happened.
life happened exactly. So this sensationalized idea of passing because they want to, they want to rid themselves of this terrible taint of African ancestry or being African is the most sensational, tantalizing crap that we can possibly put forward. Yet,
Well, and they're
book after
always
book
looking,
is highlights this.
and they're always looking for what it is too. The audience always wants to read, the book, where I don't know, an author finds out her father had African ancestry. It might have been important figure, or they always want to read about the sensationalized, like you're saying, the sensationalism behind this. Because I also think there's always a moment where I think a white audience wants to say, "Aha," and that "aha" is not,
A good one. It's not a
no, no, it's a see, you're still. You can fill that in.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so when if you tell a narrative of a thriving, proud, worldly, educated, tight community of people of color who are doing well, who own things, who have businesses, papers, societies,
Who are doing better than they should have been doing
right.
under the system.
Yeah, exactly. America's not ready to hear that.
But is America, and that's my question, and it's not even a question, but to get back on, and it's the same thing, it's right on subject. Is it America's not ready, or is it that filter that I'm talking about, that filter of white supremacy, which does hang above us, which is still above us on whether it's a museum board, whether it's another board, whether it's the university board? Is it that filter is holding it back and it's not ready because it's not getting to them?
Mm-hmm.
That's my question. Is it because they're not receiving the full signal, the full message? And that's just something we'll have to see.
Well, something, Jeremy. Here's the thing. When you think about it, what we see on TV, what we see in now, we're starting to see a little bit more, of material that's written and produced by people of color, and it's starting to, come to the forefront a little bit.
And other marginalized,
which is great, which is fabulous. I'm not saying that, but what we still see is that slave narrative, like the slave running away and killing somebody and being chased and blah blah blah. That slave narrative, and again, we see the narrative of the civil rights movement as if 1960 or 19, well, Rosa Parks started the civil rights movement when we were having a civil rights movement that started in New Orleans in the 1830s. And so,
Right.
and then the other side of it is this is when you look at those pictures and those films that are done, most of the time it's people that are the heroes getting killed. Right?
Yeah, it's not a happy ending.
Right. It's not a happy.
It's
Malcolm X
it's
is not a
almost
happy
like
ending.
it's
Right?
almost like
Yeah.
a triumphant warning,
Yeah. Yeah.
a
And
warning.
and
You know.
yeah, Martin Luther King is not a happy ending. We know that. We know. And the slavery narratives are not a happy ending. Somebody, I mean,
And so what you're saying, and what I'm appreciating is rather is that, and maybe this is also you're seeing the engine of this white supremacy, because what gets approved, what gets greenlit, is what falls into that category.
hmm
So the same thing with these museums. People want to know why my collection is not in a museum. I'm not going to blame. I'm going to tell you this: there's been plenty of opportunities for plenty local museums to seize the day and make these pieces available. These museums would rather feed you something easy and something that exalts their board members, which don't look like you, don't look like
hmm
me,
hmm
then do what they should do. Now they'll promise, and they'll give things up every now and then. They'll say, "Oh, well, look what we just brought in, something unusual." That they'll give just enough to keep people quiet.
hmm
That means doing a Black Mardi Gras exhibit. That means doing that jazz, exhibit where they talk about black people and all of this. And normally it's a white curator.
hmm
Figure that out. Normally it's a white curator telling you about your people. But that is why you're not seeing more from why they're not finding these pieces and why they're not on display. There's not an honest effort to look for them, and then there's not an honest effort to pay for them to
hmm
get the collection. So why has Jeremy been successful to ask the snarky question from a museum curator in New Orleans who asked a friend of mine? Because he put forth an honest effort and he
hmm
opened up a wallet. That's what.
And I always like to say that these are finding you. These pieces are finding you.
I think they are sometimes. I do
No,
believe that too.
I think they are. I think they're finding you, which is a good thing.
Right.
A good thing. And Jeremy, like I say, I I I we talk about changing the narrative a lot, but
Mm-hmm.
we it's going to take time, and it takes people of goodwill to be involved. And right now there are not enough people of goodwill that are involved to
Right.
start changing this narrative. I think that you're I think you know like now I think we're in the golden age of TV, right? And so maybe at some point somebody will a light bulb will come on, and they'll say, "Hey, wait a second, man. We got this story about all these free men of color who were doing all this fabulous thing, and guess what? None of them got shot at the end. They
Yeah.
lived out their life as old men, and they died in their sleep,
So I have to talk about one more thing on
Go
my
ahead.
list that you just said that makes perfect sense. Okay. So when that day does happen, which it will happen,
hmm
and this is what we got to worry about. We have to make sure that we're telling the stories. Now, don't get me wrong, there's always been allies that are white, Asian, Hispanic, whatever. There's always been people who
hmm
have tried to tell our story. Don't overlook these allies because they don't look like us, and don't think they're trying to hijack our story. There are people trying to hijack our story. And the more popular it becomes, the more important it becomes, the more financial it becomes, they're out. I mean, everybody's chasing black gold right now.
hmm
Black gold.
hmm
That's art. I mean, that's black artists. There's so many. I've never seen people break out in a sweat like they are now. All the major auction houses are just ready, salivating, ready for this,
hmm
and they're trying to hijack this movement, hijack this art,
hmm
and become authorities on it. And so we have to be conscious of that when that does happen, that we are in a position to tell our own stories.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this a little bit. About the idea that all these art forms and good deeds came out of some illicit behavior on our part, right?
Right,
Um,
that's the past narrative.
yeah,
Jazz, oh,
yeah,
born after
jazz,
story,
jazz, yeah, oh yeah. It came
the
out of
Creoles,
Storyville. It was always involved with whorehouses and
and
uh,
all of that, and
gambling and all
Creoles,
this stuff.
but
Yeah,
illegitimate children of this and that, which,
right,
you know.
right. And so they never say, oh yeah, they had a black philharmonic orchestra that was exclusively Creoles that played in the 1820s and 30s. They never say that that there was a musical community of educators who taught people how to play classical music, or that there was an opera house that black people went
And
to.
they
Right?
never talk about these architects of color who married women of color, and who were pillars in the community, who helped other people of color in the community.
Yeah.
They don't want to tell these stories, you know.
And you know something? Here's the other thing. It's important, and you're very good about this. Of course, showing their faces, like putting names to faces, right?
Yeah, I try when
And
I
yeah,
can.
I know you try, and I really stress that with people. If they have a story, put a name to that face.
Right.
Put a name to that story, and so some of the issues that we have is that we don't have pictures of these famous people, and we talk about this a lot. But it's also a suppression thing, right?
Right.
And we know that there's got to be some photographic evidence of things that are out there. We just haven't gotten to the point where they can come out and be freely circulated, right?
Right, and some of that has to do with the families, and even what we talked about, them transitioning the color line.
Mm-hmm.
We have some cousins who are not ready to share that. I have cousins literally who have documents, who have pictures, who have paintings. They're not trying to put that out in the world right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're not ready for that. That's okay.
Yeah, that's 2021. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean,
Even though I think we've slipped back about 15 years in race relations, maybe 20 years.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's
In race relations. I
yeah.
feel like, and maybe I was naive, but I feel like people got along better as a whole. And I'm not saying without incident and without major issues still, but in 2000, I feel like people were getting along
Mm-hmm.
better.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to say they weren't subjected to police brutality, et cetera, and all these other
Oh yeah,
things.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. So yeah, that's kind of, to me. I think you hit all those points. I mean, I think we have this conversation. I think that you can continue to do the material culture thing is just so important. It just has to be done, and we need to. I think that you talked about allies and interlopers, right?
There's a
And
difference.
there's a big difference, and there's a big
Right.
difference, and so we have to be very judicious about how we handle the interlopers, right? Because we want as many allies as possible, but the interlopers need to be pointed out, and usually they point themselves out.
They'll
Uh,
reveal themselves with,
yeah.
something
They usually
that's
reveal themselves.
obvious to most people who know something
Yeah,
about
exactly. So yeah, that's a battle that's going to be out there. But to me, I really want to see a different narrative put out there. I'm tired of the narratives that I see, and I don't need something. Here's the thing: I don't need this sensational thing about seeing LeBron James becoming the first black billionaire. That to me, I don't. That's great. I think that's fabulous. But I'm talking about all these. My relatives, some of them were multimillionaires back in the 1860, right?
Well, there's a lot. Yeah, there's stories of these
Yeah.
people. In LeBron James, I have nothing against it. I think that's remarkable and incredible. If that is the case in becoming a billionaire, I think that's fantastic,
Yeah.
and that's the start. And I have nothing but respect for somebody who was able to do that. I would have liked, and I don't mean this in a negative way, and it's going to sound like that. I would have liked to have seen somebody become a black billionaire for something they invented.
Mm-hmm.
But it's okay that they used sports as an avenue to grow their
Yeah,
wealth, and because it wasn't just dribbling a ball they got up
Yeah,
there. He had
I
to
fully
develop
think
something.
he'll become an enterprise. I fully think he'll be an enterprise person. So yeah. But like I say, we the point of that I'm trying to make always is that we need to bring our narrative into mainstream history, and that and
And we
like I
got
say,
to
not
use
take it over. We're not trying to take over history. We're just trying to bring in our narrative and put it in context of what was going on, and so that people have an idea that of the interactions that people were having, and the actions and reactions, and how people managed and navigated
Well,
these
we got to
ups and
show,
downs.
we have to show depth to these people. We have to show that they didn't just sing and dance. They didn't just parade around. They didn't just play music. They were thinking, feeling, sophisticated people.
Hmm.
And that sophisticated doesn't always mean highly educated. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying sophisticated in goals and in the avenues and the ways they were able to achieve those goals. And what I was going to say as a closing onto my material culture is what I have decided to do is keep using the internet, keep using the Instagram, keep using that to share
Hmm.
my pieces, because I will tell you, I just don't believe that right now, with the conditions that I'm dealing with Louisiana and the powers that be, that I can get what I need where I need it to be in these museums. And that is because of the people who are, in power, and they're still in power.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's it. That's it.
and you
I
know
mean,
something.
I can't even, I could prove it, but I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, and you're doing the right thing. You know what I'm saying? You're realizing that at this time point in time, it's not going to work for you, and you want to move things forward, right? I mean, I
Right. I'm
think.
gonna continue to do it. I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna do the other way.
Mhm.
I'm still going. I'm gonna still make it there. I'm just not going that way.
Yeah,
And that's what you got to keep doing. When things happen like that, keep going,
yeah,
and don't let these people dissuade you and all of that. So that's where I'm going with that. If I was kind of going on and on, that's what I'm trying to
yeah,
say.
and for me, I'm going to continue to try to change the narrative and show a different view of free people of color, and a different view of what happened in Louisiana in the context of U.S. history, and how important Louisiana. I mean, I'll say this a million times. How integrally important Louisiana was to U.S. history. Period. End of story. Culture,
Right.
history, food, everything. It's just it needs to be done. It needs to be done in a way that's accessible for everybody. It doesn't need to
Right.
be an all. Louisiana is not an all one or another story. You know what I'm saying? It's a big story, and it's a complicated story. And Creoles are complicated community and individuals. So
Right.
I'm gonna leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. We're not just gumbo and Mardi Gras.
Exactly, exactly. And you know something? Let's encourage people when we put this video out to make comments, and
Yeah,
it
please
was
make comments. Tell us how bad we got it right or wrong. I mean,
yeah,
just
yeah,
be
exactly.
polite.
And
Just be
we'll
polite.
we'll 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 end it there, Jeremy.
Okay, perfect.